Hi, everyone. This is Ed Amoroso, and I'm here today with a friend of mine, Aaron Turner, who I know a lot of you know is one of the icons in cybersecurity, somebody I've known and admired for a long time, and now serves as the founder and CEO of a very cool company that we're going to hear about called Siriux. But Aaron, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks, Ed. Always good to speak with you.
There's so much going on in cybersecurity that getting the opportunity to chat with you about how kind of how we got here, which I think in many cases parallels your own career. What you're doing now, and maybe some predictions about what's going on would be good. So this will be a little romp through cybersecurity for you and I, and not sure where it'll go, but I have a feeling we're going to touch on some interesting topics. So I hope people will strap themselves in and look forward to the discussion. So again, thanks for making some time, Aaron.
No, thank you, Ed. Really appreciate it.
Now you've been doing this a while. Let's go back a little bit. How'd you get into cybersecurity? What was the impetus that got you interested in this topic?
In 1993, I was running a server. I was studying Spanish linguistics, and I set up a server with a $15,000 hard drive. It was a 500 megabyte hard drive that was worth $15,000. And I connected it to the internet. This was before I met my friend Marcus Rainham and knew about firewalls and the stuff that I should have been doing. And when I connected to the internet, the rule of internet security hit me, where when you connect an unprotected resource, that resource will be used by other people. And someone decided to use that server for storing their own pornography. And in the state that I was living, the pornography that they were storing was actually illegal. It was something that was pretty nasty. And so I had to report it, right? And a lot of people didn't understand how the internet worked in 1993. And so I had to tell people, I had to teach people, this isn't my stuff. This is someone else's stuff that got put there. And I had to prove it. I had to go through and get the logs from Cisco, and back in the very, very early days before people had logging turned on. And so I got that mess cleaned up, but then they came back, right? They kept coming back and putting their stuff on my server. And so I had to sort of I was in I guess, a bad part of the internet, you might say. This was, I was maintaining a network news server, and
Mm.
in the NNTP world, that's where a lot of the trashy stuff would hang out. And so I essentially got taught through getting kicked in the teeth over and over again about how to protect myself. And then I finally said, instead of being defensive, let me be offensive against myself, right? How can I actually hack my own stuff to make it better and better? And I eventually started to do that for other people. So I would do penetration testing in the mid 90s, mainly for law firms. I was putting myself through law school at the time, so I was actually studying to be an attorney, but got caught up in some really bad corporate law stuff. And so I said, you know what, if that's the pinnacle of the law industry, then maybe I just want to be a hacker, right? And so I dropped out of law school and made this a full-time gig, and kind of got in the right place at the right time. In the late 90s, Microsoft hired me to start working on security at Microsoft, and I went on an 8-year journey there. It was an amazing ride from 0 to 60 in 2 years, where we had to spend billions of dollars to fix the Microsoft security problems. Um, and I was always looking for something. I was always pushing myself to say, okay, I've mastered this. Now what's the next security thing going to be? So I focused on email security in the late 90s, and then database security in the early 2000s, and then mobile device security after that. And then a good mutual friend of ours, Mike Asante, invited me to join the Idaho National Laboratory. And that was sort of the point at which I went from being an enterprise security guy to a security guy, right? Someone who had to think about things beyond just systems like these computer systems that we're using, to the power grid and pipelines and cellular telephone networks and all that sort of thing. And that really was a mind-blowing moment. I was very fortunate to be on that team to do some amazing things. And that sort of set me on the trajectory where I said, okay, what can I keep doing? And so when I left INL in 2008, I went and just started doing my own thing. I went and got some venture money and started a mobile payment system. And then I went and worked with some US allies on hardening cellular systems, and just kept kind of doing things. And My wife would say that I suffer from ADD. I'm an attention deficit disorder person, right? I'm always looking at all these different things, but thank goodness, right? Because that's sort of what's pushed me, right? I'm always thinking about what's the next big thing. And with Siriux right now, we were very fortunate last year to be one of the few tools that was ready for when the Russians came knocking at the US Treasury's door in Microsoft 365 infrastructure. And so we were in a very unique place to help against nation state adversaries in cloud environments like Microsoft 365. And so that's really pushed a lot of our innovation. So there's 30 years in 2 minutes, 5 minutes, I don't know, however long I took.
Well, one of the themes, Aaron, is this Microsoft theme, because I know it's an important piece of what you do at Sirius. Back when you kind of had this early itch to kind of deal with cybersecurity, and I know that feeling. It's like you're interested and intrigued, and just you can't. It's almost part of it's like there's a train wreck you can't look away from, right? But a lot of hackers would have gone away from Microsoft at the time. They had a terrible reputation in the 90s for security. Is that what attracted you, or what was the? It's not you. It's not usually the case that when we talk to the iconic sort of the folks like yourself, where Microsoft is such an important part of it. I know they have great people there, but you know what I mean. Like they were not. This is not pre sort of Bill Gates big speech about trustworthy computing. Microsoft was like evil in terms of security way back then. What was the thing that attracted you there?
I think, well, so first, when I would go to conference like the first conference, like the first conference was one of the first big conferences where you'd get together and talk about
The
incidents,
first
right?
in that old incident response, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that was sort of where I gravitated
Do
to
they
because
still
that's
happen? Is there still first conferences?
I haven't participated in
I
years, but I
haven't
am.
heard the phrase in a while. I'll have to look that up. But yeah.
But that's where I gravitated to because that's where the action was, right? I didn't like the trade shows. I didn't like even though I attended RSA back in the day in the late 90s. I liked hanging out at first, and the reason why, because that's where the action was. That's where the people who were cleaning up the global ISP level messes at the time. And
Operators. Yeah.
exactly, big operators. And when you would go to those first conferences, it was a bunch of Unix guys, right? Hardcore Unix people,
Yeah.
and they were always and they were super smart people. But one of the criticisms that I had of that group is that intellectually they weren't able to overcome their perception that Windows was just a toy or Windows was not for real computing people. And the message that I kept having for them was, well, if you don't fix Windows, so many people are impacted. Like it is such a huge part of the ecosystem. And if we as security people just keep forgetting about it and say, oh, no big deal, that Windows thing. And that's sort of what really attracted me to do something at Microsoft was because that was the hardest hill to climb, right? It was a big, hairy, nasty problem because up until the year 2000, security was anathema. It wasn't part of the main design of a product. It was like getting it to market, making it work, and that was it. And so being there and helping to solve that hard problem was really something that challenged me. It was like, when you say, I'm going to climb Mount Everest, you set your goals high. And from my perspective, solving computing security problems in computing environments for consumers and for the normal business, that's what really matters.
Something I always wanted to ask you that in the like 94, something 95, I bought this book by Helen Custer. It was called Inside Windows NT. And I remember it seemed like it had too much information in it. Somebody had told me afterwards that, like, but you know what's, I didn't know anything about Windows internals. And I also was, I was working at Bell Labs, so I was a Unix guy doing network. So, we would hang around Nanog and then all those first and so on. I was probably the embodiment of that stuffy attitude. But I bought this book and I read it, and it had it laid out a lot of the internals there, and I saw a POSIX kernel at the base of Windows. I didn't know that. Like that's sort
Oh
of
yeah.
you. I mean, there was a bunch of stuff in there, but I'm not even sure you could buy that book anymore. Somebody told me. Did you ever hear that book? I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like I still have the first edition. I bought it the week it came out. But was this idea of like proprietary versus open, like that was so woven into that. I was so happy the book let me see what was going on. It made me appreciate what was inside a little more. But that's always been my rub, that I feel like if I had to go to a whiteboard and explain to somebody how Windows works, I'm not sure I can even do it now. Like that's always been my concern, that I don't understand it. I mean, is that valid that or is proprietary the right way to go? Like it keeps the hackers guessing a little bit more. What are your thoughts on that?
Computing is computing is computing. There's no benefit, right? If you think that one system is better than another, you're deceiving yourself, right?
Yeah,
All systems are equally vulnerable because humans made those systems. Now,
yeah, yeah,
to a certain extent, if you think about the true sort of culture wars in security, think about Mac versus Windows, right? And Apple actually ran that ad. I don't know how long it's been, 15 years ago, where it was like, your Windows system is always getting sick and it's always getting viruses, and Mac doesn't get viruses. And
yeah,
and when I saw that ad, it was like when Larry Ellison came out with Unbreakable as the Oracle, database server. And it's like, you are so stupid. The reason why people aren't hacking is because you're not relevant in the market, right? Market share drives hackers. And so
yeah,
once you reach market share, like today, Mac malware exists in troves, right? There is nothing safe about a Mac. There's nothing safe about iOS. There's nothing safe about Android or Windows. They're all computing platforms. And so for me, it's more about thinking about security in terms of the market, not necessarily as far as a cultural thing of, oh, this thing's safer than another. They're all vulnerable. What are you going to do
yeah.
to protect yourself?
I mean, the Windows Mac thing always struck me as this marketing, right? It was like you buy a Mac and you're kind of cool there at the Starbucks, you look 10 years younger. You buy a Windows computer, you look like an old accountant at work or something. I mean, that was always the shtick, right? And it's probably still part of the marketing, and I don't know, I'm not a
It's
marketing
part of the
expert, but
perception. I mean, it's
I guess,
definitely still part of the market perception, right? And
yeah,
to their
you buy
detriment.
Apple, you're kind of cool and hip and Mike, but so that,
And the reason why it's to their detriment today is because you've got a situation where people like CEOs, CFOs, non-techie people have gravitated towards using Apple systems, and Apple systems are not built to defend against nation state attackers, right? So for example, the hard drive system, the hard drive encryption system on Apple is a software only system. There's no such thing as a trusted platform module on Mac, right? So if you think about at the core, people have this perception that it's safer when in fact it could set them up for bad things. It actually makes them more vulnerable. And so I think that's really one of my passions, is just to tell people, look, computing period has vulnerabilities, and whether it's in the cloud, like what we're doing with Siriux, or whether it's on your phone. One of the more interesting incidents we got involved in through some of the research I've been doing with IONS is the hackers have been focusing on the Wi-Fi access points and the routers inside of the homes of the individuals,
mm,
because everyone's working from anywhere. So why
right.
not take over the home router, because that can be your command and control base and you can get everything you want there. And so I think, people have to think about computing vulnerabilities in the broadest scale at the macro level, and then solve the problems from there.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about Siriux. You took my little team, our Tag Cyber team, through a scan. I mean, I want you to tell everybody what you do there, but it was awesome. Like we were laughing because your default configuration hadn't really done anything. You guys found a gazillion problems there. So I think you have a cool idea. Why don't you share with everybody what you do at Siriux, and hope everybody watching will call you guys and do it, because I don't see any downside. But share what you're doing. It's very cool.
So let's go back to those early days of computing, is what inspired this, right? So I was fortunate to be at Microsoft when we were evaluating scanning tools like Nessus and the old Foundstone scanner and Metasploit and all that stuff. And one of the things that I took away from those experiences in the early 2000s is that anytime you have a configurable interface, it will be vulnerable. So now let's abstract that and go towards what cloud computing is now. A lot of people moved to systems like Microsoft 365 and Salesforce because they had this perception that they were no longer managing a system, therefore the vulnerabilities would be lessened, right? But in fact, the vulnerabilities are just changed. So when you sign up for a software as a service, you have this aspect of infrastructure as code. So think of it as you have this code that configures a user. It tells the software as a service operator which services they receive, what authentication is required, all of the profile of that user. Well, if that infrastructure's code is left in a default state, it oftentimes is left in a vulnerable state compared to what your perception of what it should be. And the reason why is because the operator of that software as a service has to set it up in a default state because they're in the business of making money. Not everyone deserves to have or expects to have the best security that they can get. And so what we did last year was we essentially coded, I think, one of the first infrastructure as code vulnerability scanners that's out there, right? So where we looked at each user's configuration, every service setting, what are the iterative settings, or we basically do iterative analysis of user plus service plus third party, maybe transitive trust or federation that could introduce additional vulnerabilities. And in that cycle, we've discovered tens of thousands of vulnerabilities inside of organizations who didn't know about it, right? Because no one had actually paid attention. And so we're sort of on that first wave along with several others. There's a few companies that have raised some good money and the market has proven that it's needed, right? And so basically what we want to do is to be the best Microsoft 365 vulnerability scanner to help prevent security problems inside of Microsoft 365.
Well, the thing that we found so interesting is we're like a typical, finicky buyer user, like everybody. Going in, we're like, all right, we'll look at this thing. We're probably, whatever. We'll take a look. Aaron's a smart guy. Let's see what they can find. And when we went through it, like I was expecting to say, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. But it was more the, yeah, we better do that. And we hadn't done anything. Like we hired a consultant to come in, an expert, somebody I know is good, came in with our team, put our environment together. We had nice discussion around this and that. Felt very good about it. I do security for a living, so I'm feeling like it's good. And then you guys came in and give us this big report. I felt like an idiot. Like, whoa. I mean, make a whole career telling people to harden your settings. And here we're working. Again, I gotta be honest, it's partly that you're busy, right? I mean, you set it up, you got a million other things to do. It's partly that you just sort of trust that if you buy this thing that everybody's using, that's the most common thing, that the defaults are probably going to write. And I should know better. Maybe everything you learn in security just flies out the window when you get busy. And then it's also a combination of maybe just some malaise a little bit, like where you go, well, we'll get to that. So I know. I hope people listen. What should they do if they're interested? Just give you a call and go to your website. Spell the company too, because it's spelled in a unique way.
So we were inspired by Sirius the dog star, right? Because we want to dig deep into software as a service security, right? So we're the bloodhound, if you will, of finding vulnerabilities. So it's spelled like the dog star, but with an X at the end.
With an X,
SIRIUX.tech. And that partially has to do with trademarking and partially has to do with domain name exhaustion. But we say, yeah, because we pronounce it serious, like you're serious about security, right?
Yeah, or your radio. Yeah.
And so I think, so first off, I don't think anyone should feel stupid or blame themselves for the security problems in this platform. Part of it is that, until we have a global scale incident, people don't pay attention, right? Until there's that one incident that really shows how this thing can do, and that then trickles the information from nation state actors down to the mob, right? The miscreants. And that's what Russia did last year, right? So Russia went and attacked the US Treasury infrastructure, then hundreds of other government agencies, and Microsoft has disclosed now there are tens of thousands of organizations that have been impacted by this, not by the Russians, but by the miscreants who copycatted their attack and now are using it willy-nilly against everybody. And so I think, there's this tension that exists. Microsoft didn't intend to build a system that was going to be vulnerable like this. They intended to build a system that was available and easy to use.
Yeah,
And as
right.
you know, when you use that as a design criteria, confidentiality and integrity will suffer, right? The other legs of the triad will suffer. And so, usually the easiest way for us to show our value is to show how your information confidentiality will suffer by the default settings, because Microsoft designed this platform to be the cool kid on the block to help social media influencers and marketing teams and all the people who are sort of in the fluff of society. And they serve a very important role, but they're not the people who handle your financial data. They're not the people who handle medical information and that sort of thing. And so what our message is that Microsoft 365 is a great platform. In its default state, it is built to help a social media influencer do a great job. If you're not a social media influencer, you should probably flick some switches and harden some stuff to protect yourself.
So I hope people call. I enjoyed going through it, and I'm a believer. And usually I'm pretty skeptical about just about everything, but it was great. Hey, listen, while I've got you, I got to ask you. Look, as we're talking here in May of 21, did all these hacks, there's like a big hack of a pipeline and other stuff recently. When you see this stuff, and you and I have both been at this a while, do you just say, yeah, tell me another one, get in line, next hack, or do you feel it, Christian? Is it are these getting worse, or what? When you sit and you're talking to somebody about these things, what emotion, what kind of opinions come to mind for Aaron Turner when you think about these things?
So for me, cyber conflict, I don't like to use cyber warfare because we haven't really seen cyber warfare yet, but
Yeah,
when you
fair enough.
think about
Fair
people
enough.
using cyber tools against each other,
Yeah,
we what's the right word? Like when Napoleon fought battles, right? They were set pieces, right? You didn't necessarily have to worry about guerrilla warfare as much, right? So think about in the age of military warfare, in the age of the Civil War, when people would go and watch battles, right? People would sit on the sidelines and watch a battle. They'd take their carriage out to watch it. And that's sort of the way cyber warfare has been up until now. It has been within the confines of polite society because people have bad actors have been sort of afraid to tip the card over. Well, one thing that I've seen over 2020 with what's happened in Hong Kong with the Chinese authoritarian crackdown there,
yeah,
the motions towards Taiwan, where China has basically overtly said, "Hey, we're going to take you back along with your chip making
yeah,
infrastructure."
yeah.
The
85%
Russian,
of the global chip making capability there. Yeah.
yeah, the Russian aggression in Crimea and everything that's going on there in eastern Ukraine. You've got you. I think we are nearing the end of polite society when it comes to
Mhm.
cyber conflict. And we are going to see some people start poking each other in the eye in ways that have been on paper and theoretical. And I may have been part of, building those theories in the past of saying, what's the worst thing we could do? And I
Yeah.
think we're on the verge of seeing some incidents that are going to hurt people. I think we're nearing that time when the gloves are going to start coming off, and it's because the global society is sort of breaking down. This pandemic has accelerated the schism between different philosophies, political, that sort of thing. And I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see a range of attacks that we've talked about for a long time used in ways that will hurt people, hurt infrastructure for
Yeah.
political purposes. And that's my biggest fear, is that as that happens, what will be the net result to society? So for example, here in the United States, do we have the societal coherence to be resilient against an attack that could take the entire potable water system of Southern
I mean,
California offline?
we don't, right? I mean, you and I both know.
I hope we would. Like I have hope, right? I can at least hope. I think, maybe it's one of those times when we as Americans give up our schisms politically, right? Our philosophical differences, and go, holy crap, we do have a really good society here, and it's worth defending no matter what people believe. I hope that's the case, that we can come together, because if not, you're going to see. So this pipeline attack that is in the news right now,
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean,
It's a
ransom.
ransomware
Right. That's
job,
what I
right?
said. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what is terrifying is, you know, people poking around the potable water systems to see if they can inject excess chlorine
Yeah,
into
remember
the
that?
system,
Yeah,
right? That's
pretty
the one that's
lie
terrifying.
or whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
I have a feeling that you're right in saying that there is a resilience that you tend to see, at least in the United States. When we do get knocked down, we tend to be pretty good at getting up, dusting ourselves off, and then fighting back. But I just have a feeling that one thing, maybe it's a human quality or maybe it's an American quality, we're not real great at taking the steps before some bad thing happens to prevent it. We've always been bad at that. Forget about cyber. That is about everything that you can think of that's been a problem for us. Like we go back to World War II, you know, when we decide as a country we're going to do something, we're usually pretty darn good at that. But my instinct right now is that this is where the complexity and in some sense, the chaos around much of what we do in computing and networking, because we often try it with people who really are not well trained or put things together in a way that result in, for me, the evilness is complexity. If you can't understand the thing you're running, like people watching us right now, they work somewhere, work in a bank or something, and you and I are there, we're having a cup of coffee with them. We go, hey, you know, you work here. Here's a pen, there's a whiteboard. What's your infrastructure look like? If they can't go up there and explain it, or if five different people explain something totally different, how the heck are you going to stop a cyber attack? You can't. And that's my fear, that it's this innocent sort of, nobody seeks to be vulnerable. Nobody seeks to not understand, but I don't think people know what they have. I don't think they have an inventory. I don't think they know where their assets are. I don't think they know what the network is. That's my concern. It's not that we don't have frameworks and presidential or you know, these executive orders that are,
Missions, yeah.
everybody's trying to do all this stuff. But to me, less is more. Like I'm sure you would agree. Like if you don't, you feel uncomfortable when you're looking at something and you know you don't understand it, and then you're asked to do something with it, and you're like, look, I don't, not even sure what to do because I don't understand this thing, and how am I supposed to? It's like with Siriux. It's one of the things that's so cool is that you guys were pointing out all these bells and whistles that we had turned on, and we're all texting each other while you're going through it, going, "What the hell is that?" And they ask me, I don't know. I don't know what that is. I'm supposed to secure something when I don't even know what it is. I mean, that's where you get hacked, right? It's always that thing where you're in the incident response and you got hacked and you're in charge and you're going, "What is that? Like it does what? We had that? That was turned on? Why?" It's that feeling that I think is makes us so vulnerable. That's
Yeah,
it. It's not evil. It's just not knowing.
I think, well, and so where we're at today is we're at an inflection point. And when we either are going to embrace this new reality of where you don't own anything and it's all on someone else's cloud,
Yeah.
or we're going to retract ourselves, you know, extract ourselves from that situation. Um, and right now it's full cloud, right? The work from anywhere has forced
Yeah.
people to
Yeah.
eliminate their own infrastructure, and so we're trying to help there. Um, what do I think long term? I think Siriux is helping, but we still have fundamental problems about people not being able to explain what is actually going on.
Yeah.
And if you take a look at complex system theory and game theory, different, you know, sort of uh, philosophies that can help drive us to improve cybersecurity, we need a really good fire, right? We need a good fire just to burn this place down.
Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what you need,
And
you know?
and I think that's,
Exercise things a little bit, right? Not EXER, EX, however you spell
yeah, yeah,
exorcism.
yeah, like with a priest and a cross and
Yeah,
holy
right.
water. Yeah.
We probably
Hmm.
need some of that. Well, it's going to be a heck of a few years coming up. I have a feeling, first of all, prediction. I think you guys are going to be successful. I think you got a cool concept there. I do hope people call. So I know you, I know your team, and we've been through it. And I think it's a pretty good concept, but I also hope here's my request to you. Make sure you keep your voice, your personal voice, very active, because we need, like you and I are in some sense sort of independent. We're not beholden to some big company right now. I've run Tag Cyber. I'm in academia. I can speak my mind. And when we say things, I think people do listen to people like you, Aaron. And I hope that you'll keep your voice out there, because if there's a big fire going on, you're one of the people that I'd be listening to saying, dude, what's going on? There aren't too many around still, and you're definitely one of them. So keep your
Thank you,
voice
Ed.
out. I hope you do.
I'll try that, and that's one of the things about being an entrepreneur that's nice, right? You always
Yeah,
have to balance it. You can't say whatever you want, right? You always have to have some sort of filter to stay
I understand.
engaged, right?
Be polite.
But that's one of the things that I've loved over the last decade is I've managed to carve a way to avoid being beholden to anybody, right?
Yeah.
And that's and still
And
support my family
customers,
and meet my
yeah,
goals.
that's part of it. That's part of what customers trust. I mean, that's again, that's how I've always tried to run Tag. When we see something, I say it, and I spent a career where you had to be a little bit more careful, but it feels very empowering now. It's not, and I think it helps, just the whole our whole country. No, it's not just the U.S. You want to help everybody, avoid these things. Well, listen, Aaron, I've overstayed my welcome here with you, but I want to thank you on behalf of the Tag Cyber team and everybody watching. Hey, let's get back together in a few months and see what happens. We'll keep our fingers crossed that we don't have one of those fires that you're describing, but who knows, right?
Yeah, yeah. Here's hoping that post-pandemic we can get back to a good way to bring community together to make things better, right?
Well,
So,
we'll have a beer together sometime soon.
yep, awesome. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much. And for everybody else watching, we'll see you all next time.